I always believed my grandfather had died 20 years ago. That's what my father told me. No funeral, no gravestone, just silence. As a single mother barely scraping by, I never had time to question it until the day my daughter and I found ourselves sleeping under a bridge, hungry and hopeless. That night, an expensive black car stopped across the street. I thought it was the police. Or worse. But when the window rolled down, I saw a face I'd only seen in one old faded photo. My grandfather. He wasn't dead. He was alive. And not just alive, he was a billionaire. He took one look at my daughter and me, then said quietly, "Get in the car." We drove straight to a mansion I couldn't have imagined in my dreams. I didn't know whether to cry or run. I had so many questions. Why now? Where had he been all these years? And that's when he told me the truth about my father. What he revealed shattered everything I thought I knew about my family, my past, and why I ended up on the street with a child to protect. If you think this is just a story of reunion, think again. This is a story of betrayal, secrets, stolen legacies, and one final chance to set everything right. Stay with me. You'll want to hear what came next. Emma Reed was 32 years old, once a quiet, ambitious office assistant at a modest finance firm in Manhattan. She'd lived a life that hovered just above the line of ordinary college-educated, a single mother, and at one time determined to prove she could make it without the privileges her family once held. She never expected to fall so far. Not this far. Now it was the winter of 2023. Wind howled through the steel bones of the Brooklyn Bridge as rain fell in cold, slanted sheets. Beneath the shelter of one of its concrete supports, Emma sat curled in a patchwork tent of soaked cardboard and tattered blankets. Her arms wrapped tightly around a small bundle beside her 6-year-old daughter Lily. The city moved on above them, tires sloshing through puddles, horns in the distance, sirens slicing the air. But down there, beneath the bridge, time had slowed into a chilling kind of stillness. The type of silence that swallows you when you've run out of options. Emma pulled Lily closer, tucking the edge of a frayed coat over the child's shivering shoulders. "Do you want a story before bed, sweetheart?" she whispered, trying to keep her voice from cracking. Lily nodded weakly, her eyes wide and tired. "One about Grandpa?" Emma forced a smile. "The brave one, remember? The one who used to build big things and help people?" Lily's face brightened just a little. "He's not around anymore, right?" Emma paused. "No, honey. He passed away, a long time ago. But he was a great man, smart kind, someone you would have liked." The lie tasted bitter in her mouth. She didn't know the full truth, only what she'd been told and what she'd come to believe, that her grandfather had died 2 decades ago in some quiet, unexplained way, buried with the last shreds of the Reed family's integrity. She went on with the story, her voice low and warm, painting pictures of towers reaching into the sky and a man who never gave up on what mattered. A fairy tale, really, because no one had come to save her, not her father, not anyone. Lily interrupted, blinking up at her. "Mom, why don't we have a house?" Emma swallowed hard, eyes stinging. "Because sometimes life takes us through hard places before we find the good ones. But we're together. That's what matters, right?" Lily nodded again and finally drifted off against her shoulder, her breathing soft and even. Emma sat awake long after watching the water drip through the cracks in the concrete above. She thought about everything she'd lost. Her job during the recession, her apartment when she couldn't keep up with rent, the friends who stopped returning her calls. But nothing compared to the cold silence from her father, Charles Reed, a man with wealth, power, and every means to help, but who had looked her in the eye and said, "You are no longer my daughter." That night she'd begged, for herself, for Lily. All he gave her was a final door slammed in her face. And now she was here, huddled beneath a bridge, clutching her child like a lifeline, wondering if rock bottom had a second level. Until headlights cut through the fog. Emma blinked, shielding her eyes. The shape of a sleek black Rolls-Royce came into view, moving slowly, deliberately toward their spot under the bridge. She tensed. No one ever came here unless they meant harm, or unless they were lost. The car stopped. The engine went quiet. She wrapped herself protectively around Lily, heart pounding. The back door opened, and from the shadows emerged a tall man in a long wool coat. He stepped out with a steadiness that suggested he was no stranger to authority, but something about his posture, tight, deliberate, also hinted at personal burden. He came closer, hesitating under the drizzle. Emma Reed. Emma's body froze. His voice was deeper than she remembered, aged, but unmistakable. Her breath caught in her throat as the man stepped into the light. Wrinkles carved deep lines through his face, and his once dark hair had turned silver. But his eyes, those sharp steel-gray eyes, were the same. "Grandpa," she whispered. "It couldn't be. It shouldn't be." Walter Reed had died. Her father had said so. The papers had confirmed it. There was no funeral, no closure, just absence. And yet there he was, standing in front of her in the pouring rain, looking like a ghost given flesh, with a luxury car idling behind him, and the air around him thick with everything she no longer had. He didn't smile. He didn't speak right away. He just looked at her, looked at Lily, then back to her. And in that moment, Emma didn't feel cold anymore. She didn't feel hungry or angry or broken. She just felt confused, raw, and hollowed out by years of believing no one from her family would ever come for her. Walter spoke again, more gently this time. "You've been through enough." Emma couldn't respond. She could barely breathe. All she could think was one question that had been buried for years, now rising to the surface with a mix of hope and fury. How was he alive? And why, after 20 years of silence, was he standing in front of her now? That answer would change everything. Emma didn't remember walking toward the car. Her legs moved beneath her as if someone else had taken control. Rain still clung to her coat, but she no longer felt it. All she could see was the man standing there, his eyes steady on hers. Eyes she hadn't seen since she was a child, staring from the frame of an old photo in a dusty hallway. Walter Reed. Her grandfather. A ghost come to life. He extended a hand not with urgency, but with gentleness, as if he were afraid one sudden move might scare her off. Emma hesitated only a second before placing her trembling fingers into his. The warmth of his grip was real. So was the silent plea in his expression. "Come with me." The interior of the car smelled of leather and subtle cologne. Lily stirred beside her, sleepily rubbing her eyes. Walter sat across from them, watching the little girl with a strange mix of reverence and remorse, as if each breath she took brought him both peace and pain. "I want to help," he said quietly, "if you'll let me." Emma didn't respond. She held Lily closer, the child's small body tucked under her chin. Her mind spun through 1,000 questions, none with safe answers. The drive to Manhattan felt endless and instant all at once. The city glowed as it always had, aloof, towering, indifferent. But the neighborhood they entered was a different world. Clean sidewalks, security gates, manicured hedges and limestone facades. When the car pulled up in front of a tall, stately townhouse nestled between embassies and luxury condos, Emma froze. "You live here?" she asked, her voice dry. Walter nodded. For now. Inside, warmth spilled through the halls like a living thing. An assistant took their coats. Another brought hot tea. Lily clung to her hand wide-eyed as they walked past oil paintings and high ceilings into a drawing room that felt like a page torn from another life. Emma sat down slowly as if she might break the furniture. Walter remained standing. He watched her with an intensity that made her skin tighten. Finally, she found the words. "They said you were dead." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked to the fireplace, picked up a framed photo, and handed it to her. It was an old company portrait. Reed Enterprises. Her father Charles stood proudly in the center, Walter beside him. Behind them, the golden logo gleamed. "I wasn't dead, but I might as well have been," She looked up sharply. What happened? Walter sat down across from her hands, folded eyes lowered for the first time. Your father. He was angry, resentful, always believed I favored his younger brother. After the funeral, he changed. Emma didn't interrupt. I trusted him, Walter continued. He brought me documents to sign, said they were routine. I didn't read them carefully. I'd been tired, worn, a mistake I'd never made before. I signed away the company. Emma's jaw tightened. Then the rumors began. A boating accident, a disappearance. Within months, the board declared me dead. Legally, I was removed from every record. He didn't just take the company. He erased me. Emma stared at him, stunned. So, what did you do? He smiled faintly. I started over. Quietly. Using the contacts I had left. I moved into tech. Built a team. Founded Sunbridge Holdings. Small at first, then big enough to compete with what I lost. But I kept my name buried. I didn't want him coming after me again. Emma took this in slowly. Walter Reed, the man who once led one of New York's oldest financial empires, had been hiding in plain sight for 20 years, rebuilding what his own son had stolen. And me, she asked. Did you ever think of me? His face changed. The firelight flickered across his features, revealing something rawer, older than regret. Guilt. I did, he said softly. I never forgot you. Not a day. Her throat tightened. Then why didn't you find me when I was homeless? When I lost my job? When Lily was sick and I had nowhere to go? Walter didn't look away. I received your letter. That stunned her. He nodded. It came to an old address. I still checked it sometimes. When I read it, I knew you were in pain. I wanted to reach out. But his voice broke for the first time. I was afraid. Afraid that if Charles and Diana found out where I was, they'd tear down everything I'd rebuilt. They nearly ruined me once. And I wasn't strong then. I was sick, grieving, angry at myself more than anyone. Emma's voice shook. So you let us suffer? No, he said firmly. I hated myself for it. I followed your trail. I sent someone to check on you, but by the time they got there, you'd moved on. You were always a step ahead, or maybe I was always a step too late. Lily had fallen asleep on the sofa, curled into the cushions like a kitten. Walter glanced at her, and when he looked back at Emma, his eyes were damp. She looks like you, he said. Emma looked away. I can't undo the time we lost, he added. But I can be here now, if you'll let me. She didn't respond right away. Her heart was a storm, rage, hurt, relief, doubt. But in that silence, she saw something else in Walter's expression. Fear. Not fear of Charles, not fear of being found, fear of being rejected, of being too late. And that somehow made him human again. She nodded barely and whispered, We'll stay tonight. Walter exhaled slowly. That's all I ask. In the quiet that followed, Emma leaned her head back, listening to the rain tapping gently against the windows of a world she didn't belong to, but just maybe one she would learn to claim. Walter didn't sleep that night, and neither did Emma. As Lily rested in a warm bed for the first time in weeks, her mother sat in the guest room window seat staring out at the city's skyline. Behind her, the quiet ticking of an antique clock echoed through the stillness. Emma's thoughts drifted toward one man, her father, Charles Reed, the one person who could have changed everything but chose to leave her in the dark. The next morning over breakfast, served by a housekeeper who barely blinked at the presence of strangers, Emma finally asked the question that had been pulsing in her mind since the night before. Tell me about him. Walter didn't need clarification. He set his coffee down and leaned back in the leather chair, folding his hands slowly, deliberately. His eyes were tired not from lack of rest, but from the weight of memories he'd carried for too long. Charles was always first, he began. The firstborn, the one who carried the family name with pride. From the beginning, everyone said he was meant to lead. He was bright, ambitious, good with numbers. But he was also sensitive. He saw every decision I made as a judgment. Emma listened without interrupting. When your uncle, his younger brother, came along, things changed. Your uncle had a softer nature. He was artistic, emotional, needed more attention. I tried to give both of them what they needed, but Charles, he believed I loved his brother more. Walter's voice tightened. No matter how many times I told him it wasn't true, he only heard the praise I gave his brother. And when your uncle died in that accident, it broke the entire family. Charles didn't grieve like the rest of us. He turned bitter, cold. Emma watched her grandfather's eyes cloud over with a pain that was still fresh. And that's when she appeared. Diana. He said the name with no venom, just a kind of weariness, like someone recalling a storm that had already passed but left the house ruined. She worked for one of our biggest rivals. Young, smart, ruthless in a way few men could see coming. But Charles? He saw her as his equal. She understood his resentment. She fed it. Walter stood and walked slowly toward the fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back. Diana convinced him that he had been cheated, that I was grooming someone else to take his place, that he had a right to more, and he believed her. Emma could feel the tension building like pressure behind a dam. They plotted together. At first, small things, questioning board decisions, shifting accounts. Then came the documents. I trusted Charles with full authority. He presented me with the stack of papers, said they were part of a company restructuring. I was tired. I didn't read them. I signed them. His voice grew quieter. Within weeks, Diana spread the rumor of my disappearance, claimed I'd fallen off a private yacht lost at sea. No body, no witnesses. The press ran with it. My name vanished from the company within a month. Emma's stomach churned. And no one questioned it. Some did, Walter admitted. But Diana had prepared everything. A fake witness, a falsified investigation report. She even planted emails suggesting I'd planned to disappear. The board, afraid of instability, confirmed Charles as interim CEO. Within a year, he made it permanent. Walter returned to his seat, eyes dark now. Then came the final betrayal. He married her, and not long after she was pregnant. Emma leaned forward. With Martin, Walter nodded. Charles named him after his brother, the one he thought I loved more. Said he wanted to restore the name. And I suppose in his mind that child was his redemption, his replacement legacy. Emma's fingers gripped her mug. And he raised Martin as the heir, yes, Walter said, as the future of Reed Enterprises, as the son who would finally get the praise Charles felt he never received. But Martin, he isn't who they say he is. Emma frowned, sensing more, but Walter didn't elaborate. I watched from afar, he continued. Built Sunbridge in the shadows, started over. But I never stopped wondering where I went wrong. How a son I loved could turn into a man who would erase me so completely. His gaze settled on her softer now. You ask why I didn't find you sooner. Maybe part of me feared that if I did, I'd only bring more pain into your life. Maybe I thought you were better off not knowing how ugly it had all become. Emma felt the weight of generations pressing on her chest. Charles Reed wasn't just a cruel father. He was the product of wounds left untreated, of love, misread, of ambition, manipulated. That didn't excuse what he'd done. But it explained the storm that had torn her family apart and why her own life had become the wreckage. And now she understood the stakes. This wasn't just about forgiveness. It was about reclaiming a name that had been stolen and deciding whether she would carry it forward, or leave it buried with the man who had tried to destroy it. Emma didn't speak for a long time after Walter finished his story. The fire crackled softly in the study, casting warm light across the oak-paneled walls, but the silence between them was colder than the winter wind outside. She sat in the armchair, her arms wrapped around her knees like a child, eyes fixed on the flames yet lost in another time altogether. I used to think she began quietly, that I must have done something terribly wrong to deserve all of it. Walter looked up from his seat across the room. Emma's voice remained calm, but each word felt like it had been dredged up from deep within her chest. My mother, she wasn't like the rest of the family. She wasn't loud or ruthless or calculating. She was quiet, kind, a little fragile maybe. I remember watching her fade. Not from illness, not at first, but from disappointment. Every time Charles ignored her at a party, every time someone in the family dismissed her as just the wife, it chipped away at her. Walter lowered his gaze. He already knew what was coming. After my uncle died, Emma continued, she barely spoke. She carried so much grief, hers, yours, Charles's. And no one noticed. Or maybe they did and just didn't care. She fell into depression and it swallowed her whole. I was 16 when she died. Emma paused to breathe. The memory tasted bitter in her throat. They said it was natural causes. But it wasn't. She died from being invisible. Walter whispered, I didn't know it had gotten so bad. Emma turned her head slowly toward him, eyes sharp with restrained anger. No, you didn't want to know. The words hung there between them, unforgiving, heavy. Walter didn't defend himself. He simply nodded. Emma exhaled, her voice growing softer again. After she was gone, I thought maybe Charles would hold on tighter to what remained. But he didn't. I became a liability to his image. When I got pregnant at 25, he didn't even ask who the father was. He just looked at me like I had dragged the Reed name through mud. She gave a humorless laugh. He called me a disgrace. Told me I had 1 hour to leave his house and never come back. Said I was no longer his daughter. Walter flinched, but said nothing. Emma stared into the fire again. So I left, with nothing but a duffel bag and a 6-week-old ultrasound. I stayed with a friend for a while, picked up temp work, did freelance data entry during the day, and waited tables at night. After Lily was born, I tried selling handmade crafts online. Some months we made it. Some months we didn't. Her voice wavered for the first time. One night, Lily had a fever. She was 3. We were living in a shared basement apartment in Queens. The heat had gone out. I held her all night wrapped in towels and prayed it would break. When the sun rose and she still hadn't opened her eyes, I panicked. Walter leaned forward, his hands trembling. I wrote a letter, Emma whispered. To you. I didn't know if you were alive. I didn't even know where to send it. But I found an old address in a legal document from years ago. I begged. For anything. A place to stay. A loan, a bed for Lily. I never heard back. She finally looked at him. You got that letter, didn't you? Walter didn't answer right away. His eyes glistened with moisture, and for a moment Emma thought he might deny it. But he didn't. He nodded. I did, he said hoarsely. It arrived weeks after you sent it. I read it alone in a hotel room in Tokyo. I remember every word. Then why didn't you come? Walter swallowed, visibly shaken. Because I was afraid. Afraid of what she snapped. Of losing everything again, he said. I had just rebuilt Sunbridge. Quietly. Carefully. The moment Diana or Charles knew I was alive, they would have come for it. And at that point, I wasn't strong. I was still clawing my way out of depression. Years of hiding, of watching the company I built being stripped down and twisted into something ugly. I was barely breathing. And when I saw your letter, his voice cracked. I froze. I told myself I would help later when I was safer, stronger. But later never came. Emma didn't speak. Her jaw clenched, her eyes brimming. Walter stood and walked toward her. He didn't kneel, didn't beg. He simply placed a hand on the back of her chair. I failed you, he said. As a grandfather. As a man. Emma turned away, tears sliding down her cheeks. You were the only family I had left. I know. And you left me too. Walter bowed his head. For several minutes they said nothing. Only the sound of the fire filled the silence. Then, through clenched teeth and a trembling voice, Emma said, I'm not sure I can forgive you. I wouldn't ask you to, Walter replied. But I hope in time you'll let me try to make things right. Not just with words. Emma wiped her face with the sleeve of her sweater. Her chest hurt not just from the pain, but from the strange relief of finally saying it all aloud. She didn't offer forgiveness. But she didn't walk away either. And for now, that was enough. The next morning, Emma awoke to the unfamiliar hush of a home that never worried about rent. The walls of Walter's townhouse seemed to absorb sound rather than echo it, as if the building itself had nothing left to prove. Lily was still asleep, curled in Egyptian cotton sheets that Emma had never dreamed she'd touch. For a moment she stood at the doorway just watching her daughter breathe, remembering all the nights she'd checked for frost on Lily's lips, afraid of what winter might steal from her. By noon, Walter called her into his study. The conversation was brief, but heavy with implication. I want you to work, he said. If you're going to rebuild your life, I won't do it for you. But I will open the first door. Emma didn't hesitate. Where's Sunbridge Holdings? You'll start as a project assistant. No titles, no last names. You'll earn your place the way I did. That same afternoon, Emma stepped into the soaring glass lobby of Sunbridge for the first time, not as the lost granddaughter of Walter Reed, but as a nobody with a temporary badge and a chipped briefcase. She wore a second-hand blazer, a pair of scuffed heels, and the kind of determination born not from ambition, but necessity. Her first day felt like drowning. Everyone was younger, faster, louder. A woman in her 30s who had a 6-year gap in her resume was to them either a charity case or someone sleeping her way into opportunity. The whispers began almost immediately. She's his granddaughter, right? Probably just here until she marries a board member. No way she gets through the next quarter. Emma said nothing. She smiled politely, took notes at meetings she barely understood, and went home each night with her brain spinning from acronyms she didn't recognize. But instead of quitting, she logged onto free online courses in financial modeling and data analytics. She stayed up after Lily fell asleep rewatching the day's meeting transcripts, replaying corporate jargon like a foreign language lesson. She scribbled notes on napkins, recorded questions in voice memos, and slowly began connecting dots that once seemed galaxies apart. Within 2 months, she could explain Sunbridge's entire API structure and forecast user growth trajectories by quarter. By month 4, her name began showing up on internal pitch decks. Her supervisor, a brash 27-year-old named Mason, wasn't impressed. You're improving, he told her once, but this isn't a classroom. One mistake and you're out. That mistake came in the 5th month. Emma was given her first independent assignment, a small merger deal involving a promising fintech startup out of Austin. She had done the projections, organized the deck, and handled communications with the startup's CEO. But one thing she missed, one painfully simple, devastating oversight, was the mismatch in the customer base. Her team had built the proposal around an assumed demographic of small business clients. In reality, the startup's traction came from niche freelance platforms. The misalignment caused immediate concern during negotiation. The startup pulled out. Sunbridge lost the deal. On paper, it was a $20 million misfire. But the reality was worse. Walter had sunk months of time and a sizable portion of the year's flexible capital into grooming that deal. He hadn't told Emma how high the stakes were, hadn't wanted to put that pressure on her. But now the failure threatened not just their reputation, but the company's entire growth forecast for the fiscal year. Emma didn't sleep that night. She waited for the call, the reprimand, the dismissal. It never came. Instead, Walter called her into his office the next morning. No anger in his voice, just quiet. I've read your breakdown, he said. You missed the segmentation. I know, Emma replied, her voice barely steady. I'm sorry. I should have cross-checked the usage reports. He studied her face. You're not wrong. But you're not the first one to make that mistake. And you won't be the last. Emma's eyes widened. But the deal, I'll salvage what I can, Walter said. I'm already speaking to their investors. There may be room to restructure. But this isn't about the money. It's about what you do next. Emma sat there stunned. You're not pulling me off the team. Walter leaned forward. I've lost everything before, Emma. You learn more from one honest mistake than 100 safe wins. You made an error because you cared. You wanted to do it right. That matters. It was the first time anyone had ever spoken to her like that in a professional setting, not with scorn, not with indulgence, but with belief. She walked out of that room shaken, not because she'd been punished, but because she hadn't. Because someone had seen her stumble and chosen not to bury her for it. What she didn't know, what Walter would never tell her, was just how close the company had come to collapse. The startup deal had been a cornerstone of Sunbridge's Q3 expansion. Without it, a dozen other smaller projects would be delayed or scrapped. But Walter, with the reputation of a ghost and the cunning of a survivor, renegotiated terms behind the scenes, traded favors, and convinced the startup to reconsider under a restructured licensing agreement. He never told Emma how hard it was to do, because he didn't want her to work from fear. He wanted her to keep climbing, not to repay him, but to prove something to herself. And so she did. Emma's progress at Sunbridge didn't go unnoticed. Within a few months of her early failure, she'd helped close 3 smaller contracts, revised internal protocols for onboarding new clients, and even received an offhand nod of approval from her once dismissive supervisor. For the first time in years, she was walking into a workplace not with dread, but with quiet confidence. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was earning her place. But success often attracts attention, and not always the good kind. Her first encounter with Martin happened at a joint fintech panel held at a Midtown conference center. Sunbridge and Reed Enterprises had both been invited to present competing pitches for a government-funded cybersecurity initiative. Emma hadn't expected to be seated at the front table, but Walter insisted she attend. You'll learn more in one afternoon of competition than in a semester of theory, he said with a small smile. She'd heard of Martin before. His name floated through the industry like a golden thread, Harvard-educated charismatic, already a board member before 30. When he entered the room, heads turned. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a custom navy suit, his posture rigid with purpose. His eyes scanned the room like he owned it. When they landed on Emma, his expression barely flickered. You must be the girl they pulled off the sidewalk, he said, holding out his hand with a condescending smile. Emma took it firm grip. And you must be the boy whose mirror tells him he's already CEO. He chuckled, but there was a flicker of irritation behind his eyes. During the panel, Martin dominated the floor. His pitch was polished, aggressive, full of high-tech language designed to impress rather than inform. Emma's team took a more human-centric approach, focusing on accessible solutions and long-term adaptability. By the end of the session, the room was split, but a few key investors whispered their interest in Sunbridge's modest but grounded vision. Martin noticed. Afterward, in the hallway outside the auditorium, he approached her again. Impressive show, he said. I almost believed you wrote that presentation yourself. Emma raised an eyebrow. I did. Right, he replied with a smirk. I forget. You're Walter's latest project. He leaned in slightly, voice lower. But everyone knows what this is. He's trying to redeem his broken bloodline. Make up for your father's miscalculations. It won't last. You don't belong here. Before she could reply, he was already walking away, exchanging pleasantries with the senator's aide like he hadn't just spit venom. Emma returned to the Sunbridge office with a fire burning in her chest. That night, unable to sleep, she wandered into Walter's private study, something she rarely did, and pulled a few folders from the family records shelf, mostly out of idle curiosity. It was there, tucked between tax documents and old board meeting notes, that she noticed something odd, a second copy of Martin's birth certificate. She wasn't looking for it. But the details were off. 2 certificates. One listed Charles as the father. The other left the field blank. The formatting didn't match. The signatures looked digitally altered. The next day, still unsure of what she was holding, she visited Gerald, a retired Sunbridge legal advisor who had worked with Walter during the company's earliest years. He was in his 80s now, sharp as ever, and living quietly upstate. She showed him the documents over coffee. He didn't hesitate. "Oh, this one's fake," he said, tapping the certificate naming Charles. "Walter had me look into this years ago unofficially. Martin isn't Charles's biological son. Diana was already pregnant when they married. Charles never knew until later, but by then he was too deep. Public image board politics. He decided to raise the boy as his own." Emma blinked. "So Walter knew too?" Gerald nodded. "Of course. It's why Martin was never mentioned in his estate plans. He considered it a stain, but not the boy's fault. Still, Charles tried to push Martin forward as the future of Reed Enterprises." Emma left with her mind spinning. Martin, the polished heir, the one who sneered at her like she didn't belong, wasn't even a Reed by blood. He had no biological claim to Walter's legacy, no right to the seat he occupied. And yet, he was the public face of Reed Enterprises, the one standing across the table from her in the fight for contracts and reputation. And now they were about to clash again. The government contract from the panel had narrowed down to two final contenders, Reed Enterprises and Sunbridge Holdings. Martin was set to lead the next round of negotiations. Emma was tapped to lead Sunbridge's response. They would be facing off directly for the first time, not just with words, but with strategy, influence, and legacy on the line. Walter didn't comment when she told him. He simply handed her a thick dossier of notes and quietly said, "Make them listen." Emma walked out of the office clutching the truth in one hand and a future yet to be written in the other. She wasn't just fighting for her place anymore. She was fighting to expose who really belonged, and who never did. Emma had always known she wasn't the smartest person in the room, but she also knew no one would outwork her. And when the stakes rose, that difference mattered. The project she was handed was a salvage job, an internal investment Sunbridge had made into a mid-sized European firm that had failed to launch their cybersecurity product due to poor adoption rates and inconsistent user feedback. The board was preparing to write it off as a loss. Chalk it up to R&D, someone had said at the Monday meeting. Just cut the cord and refocus. But Emma had been reviewing the analytics behind the scenes for days, and something didn't add up. The metrics told a different story than the executives were seeing. While the user base was small, engagement was unusually high. The few clients who did use the software were integrating it across multiple departments and extending usage. And yet the conversion funnel was broken not because of the product, but because of flawed messaging and targeting. The wrong audience had been chased from the beginning. Emma built a new proposal overnight. She outlined a complete repositioning strategy, adjusted the communication campaign, and suggested a leaner rollout that focused on mid-size regulation-heavy industries like healthcare and legal firms rather than sprawling tech corporations. At first, no one listened. But Walter did. He gave her 72 hours and a skeleton team to test her theory. They ran a limited pilot with 3 regional firms. By the end of the week, all 3 had converted to paid subscribers. Within a month, the software not only broke even, it brought in over $15 million in new revenue and repositioned Sunbridge as a serious player in the secure data services market. It wasn't just a win. It was a turning point. Emma, who had once been known as the girl Walter found under a bridge, was now being called the analyst who saved the quarter. A few weeks later, Walter invited her to speak on his behalf at a global fintech summit in Chicago. She initially resisted. "I'm not a keynote speaker," she said. "I don't have the pedigree." "You have something better," Walter replied. "Results." She flew out with Lily, who stayed backstage with Walter's longtime assistant. Emma wore a charcoal suit, understated jewelry, and walked on stage in front of an audience that once would have laughed her out of the room. Instead, they listened. She presented a new software prototype she'd co-developed, an AI-driven financial security module designed to identify hidden vulnerabilities in business infrastructures. The demo was sleek, practical, and built around real data. Emma spoke not like a showman, but like someone who understood exactly what it meant to have everything at risk. When she finished, the room didn't erupt. It didn't need to. The quiet, firm applause told her what she needed to know. They took her seriously now. But it was what came after that changed everything. During the summit's final press conference, a reporter asked Walter, seated beside her, whether he had chosen a successor at Sunbridge. Walter didn't hesitate. "My granddaughter Emma," he said loud enough for every microphone in the room to catch it, "is not only the most resilient person I've ever met, she's the future of this company. Not because of her name, but because she knows what it means to fall and how to rise. The real heir to Sunbridge isn't just a strategist. She's someone who understands people. She's someone who sees things others miss. That's what leadership looks like." Emma sat frozen for a moment, stunned. It was the first time he'd said it aloud, publicly, with no hesitation, no calculated spin, just truth. Later that evening, after the applause, the handshakes, and the networking dinners had faded into the quiet of her hotel room, Emma sat by the window and looked out at the Chicago skyline. Lily was asleep in the other bed, her soft breathing steady and peaceful. Walter knocked gently before stepping in. "I meant every word he said." Emma didn't reply immediately. She just nodded slowly. There was no grand forgiveness speech, no dramatic tears. But something inside her had shifted. She didn't see Walter only as the man who'd once failed her. She saw him now as a man trying genuinely to make it right, not through apologies, but through action. And for the first time since she was a little girl, Emma felt that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone anymore. She didn't say thank you. She didn't need to. The look in her eyes said it all. The week after the summit was unusually quiet, but not for lack of activity. Behind the scenes, Emma and Walter were orchestrating a silent storm. Every move was deliberate, every decision weighed twice before being executed. They weren't rushing, this was about precision, not speed. It began with a single phone call to an independent law firm that Walter had trusted since his earliest days in business, one he knew had no affiliations with either Reed Enterprises or Sunbridge. He wanted no room for accusations of favoritism. Within hours, a private team of investigators was reviewing every document tied to the original transfer of Reed Enterprises contracts, board meeting minutes, internal emails, and most importantly, the paper trail surrounding Diana and Martin. Emma worked beside them, poring over digital records until her eyes blurred. There were too many holes in the original asset transfer to be coincidence. Dates didn't line up. Signatures were inconsistent. Diana's name appeared on financial transactions before she officially joined Reed Enterprises. And most damning of all, Martin's documentation had been altered repeatedly over the years, sometimes retroactively, sometimes sloppily, but always with the same intent to fabricate legitimacy. "What exactly do you want from this?" the lead investigator asked Emma one evening after she handed over another set of scanned bank statements. Emma didn't hesitate. "I want the truth. Not revenge, not spectacle. Just the truth. In front of everyone." Walter, listening nearby, gave a slight nod. His eyes had the weariness of a man who had waited too long to correct the record. They decided to act through ceremony. Instead of confrontation, they would orchestrate a celebration, a distraction wrapped in silverware and applause. Walter announced through a formal press release that he would host a private gala at the Astoria Grand Hotel in Manhattan, ostensibly to honor the future leadership of Sunbridge Holdings. The phrasing was deliberately vague. No name was attached, no hint of drama, just enough to draw curiosity from industry leaders, investors, media, and critically the people who needed to hear the truth the most. The moment the press release went out, Martin took notice. He wasn't stupid. The timing felt wrong. Emma's recent success, Walter's increasing public praise. Something was shifting. Within a day, he showed up at the Sunbridge offices without an appointment. "I just came to offer congratulations," he said casually, strolling past the reception desk and straight into the executive wing. Emma met him at the glass wall near the elevator bank, arms folded. Martin smiled too wide. "Big gala, huh? Sounds important." Emma didn't flinch. "You'll see." His eyes narrowed slightly. You should be careful, Emma. You're new to all this. Sometimes when people dig up the past, they uncover things that bury them. Emma stepped closer. Her voice was quiet but steady. Sometimes the past is the only way to free the future. Martin left without another word. That night, Diana called him from their penthouse. Her voice, usually composed, held an edge of panic. You need to find out what they're doing. I'm getting calls, people asking about old documents records. Someone's looking too closely. Martin promised to handle it, but the truth was, he couldn't stop what was already in motion. Emma and Walter had fortified their plans, and the evidence was no longer locked in a single vault or email server. It had been cross-verified, notarized, and archived with legal witnesses. And Diana's instincts were right. The cracks in their facade were widening. Walter, for his part, remained calm. His instructions to the legal team were simple. No grand accusations. Let the facts speak. Let them answer for themselves. The night before the gala, Emma stood on the hotel's rooftop terrace looking out over the Manhattan skyline. Lily was asleep upstairs, guarded by Walter's most trusted aide. The city lights shimmered beneath her like a map of unfinished dreams. Walter joined her in silence, his hands tucked behind his back. "This isn't about me," Emma said softly. "I don't want revenge." He nodded. "I know. I just want them to stop pretending they built something they stole. I want people to see the truth." Walter looked at her, the faintest glimmer of pride in his eyes. "Then tomorrow you'll give it to them." She turned toward him. "No matter what happens next, thank you for believing in me." He smiled. "I don't believe in you because you're my granddaughter. I believe in you because you've earned it." As they left the rooftop, the ballroom below was being transformed. Crystal chandeliers, polished name cards aligned on gold-trimmed tables, floral arrangements framing a stage where before long the past and future would collide. Down the street in the dark of a waiting car, Martin watched the lobby from a distance. For the first time, he wasn't certain which side of the story he'd end up on. And in their penthouse, Diana sat alone, phone silent in her hand, eyes fixed on a framed photo of her wedding day, wondering just how much longer the mask could hold. The ballroom of the Astoria Grand shimmered with soft golden light as nearly 300 guests took their seats. Industry leaders, tech investors, media outlets, board members, and influential partners filled the hall. A string quartet played faintly in the background, while servers weaved between tables offering glasses of champagne and whispered updates about who had arrived. Everyone knew this wasn't just a gala. There was something else simmering beneath the surface, and Walter Reed was known never to waste an audience. At the head of the ballroom, a stage had been erected with a minimalist backdrop, Sunbridge Holdings' silver emblem floating elegantly above a single microphone. The invitation had promised a celebration of legacy and leadership, but no one truly knew who would be honored tonight. Except Emma. She stood behind the curtain, her palms cold despite the heat of the lights. Her heart wasn't racing out of fear, it was resolve. She wore a dark green gown, modest and strong, and held a small remote control in her hand. The first slide on the projector was loaded. The files had been vetted, triple-checked, and time-stamped. Nothing tonight would be left open to interpretation. Walter approached her from the side, dapper in a tailored black suit. "Are you ready?" he asked gently. Emma turned. "For the first time in my life." "Yes." He smiled, kissed her on the forehead, and stepped back. "Then, let them know who you are." When she walked out onto the stage, the room fell silent. Cameras clicked. Phones were raised. Some murmured recognition, others surprise. Emma looked out over the crowd. Her voice, when it came, was clear even. 20 years ago, I believed my family legacy had ended. My grandfather, Walter Reed, was presumed dead. My father, Charles Reed, told me I had disgraced our name. I was cast out, alone, homeless. I gave birth to my daughter under a stranger's roof. I worked minimum wage, I begged for help, and I received none. The projector behind her lit up. A brief video montage began Emma walking with Lily along the East River, the cardboard tent under the Brooklyn Bridge, and finally, Lily chasing butterflies in Walter's Manhattan estate garden. "I am not telling you this for pity," Emma said. "I am telling you because the people in this room need to understand the price of silence and the value of truth." She clicked the remote again. The first image appeared 2 scanned birth certificates. One clean, one digitally altered. Martin Reed is not the biological son of Charles Reed. He is not the grandson of Walter Reed. The truth was hidden to preserve public image. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Cameras zoomed in. Click. Next slide, shell company names, bank transfers, foreign accounts. Over the past 15 years, Diana and Charles Reed created a network of shell corporations to launder funds siphoned from Reed Enterprises. The evidence is here verified by independent investigators with transaction logs, recipient trails, and offshore beneficiaries. Click. A final document appeared, an old board agreement with Walter's original signature. Forged. This contract was used to illegally transfer Reed Enterprises from its founder Walter Reed under false pretenses. It was backed by a false death certificate orchestrated and sealed through bribery and misinformation. I present all these documents today not for scandal, but for correction. At the far end of the ballroom, Diana stood frozen, her wineglass trembling. Next to her, Martin's face had gone pale. He pushed back his chair, bumping into a passing server, and stormed toward the hallway, cameras catching his retreat. Emma paused. She looked across the room until her gaze landed on her father. Charles sat motionless, his expression unreadable, hands folded tightly in his lap. For the first time, he did not attempt to interrupt. He did not speak. He did not defend. Walter rose from his seat and walked to the stage. He stood beside Emma and took the microphone. "For 20 years I have remained silent, watching my legacy twisted and stolen," he said calmly. "But no longer. Tonight I make it clear there is only one rightful heir to what I've built. One person who carries the values of this family with integrity and courage." He turned to Emma. "My granddaughter, Emma Reed." The applause came slowly at first. Then it swelled, resounding, persistent. Cameras captured every moment. The board chair of Sunbridge Holdings stood and made a formal announcement. "In light of the evidence presented and with Walter Reed's full endorsement, we confirm Emma Reed as the next CEO and rightful heir to Sunbridge Holdings." Before Diana could protest, 2 legal representatives quietly approached her table. One handed her a formal letter, immediate removal from all board positions pending investigation. She tried to speak, but her voice cracked and faded beneath the sound of 100 whispers and flashing cameras. Emma stepped forward again, this time without the remote. "Thank you for listening," she said, her voice firm but calm. "I didn't come here to destroy. I came here to rebuild with truth, with accountability, and with the hope that no one else will ever have to go through what I did, just to prove they belonged." She stepped down from the stage and walked toward Lily, who had been quietly brought in for the final moment. The little girl reached up and took her mother's hand. Together they walked through the crowd, not as victims, not even as survivors, but as something greater, as the true heirs of the Reed name. The days that followed the gala moved with clinical precision. The silence that had once protected Charles, Diana, and Martin shattered into headlines, subpoenas, and formal investigations. There was no longer any narrative to spin, no version of the story that could be recut to protect reputations. The truth had already taken root in public memory. Within 48 hours, the board of directors at Reed Enterprises convened an emergency session. The media had caught wind of it, and a crowd of journalists waited outside the glass tower in Midtown Manhattan as suited executives filed into the room. Inside, behind polished mahogany doors, the mood was somber but resolute. The evidence presented at the gala was irrefutable. Legal advisors confirmed its authenticity. Stakeholders, fearing the erosion of brand value, knew inaction was no longer an option. The vote to remove Charles Reed as CEO passed with a staggering majority, 9 votes to 1. The final abstention came from a board member who had once been a close friend of Charles's, but even he offered no defense. Charles did not attend the meeting. He sat alone in his penthouse office watching the city through the one-way glass. He hadn't spoken since the night of the gala. Diana, under federal custody, was being questioned about the chain of laundering transactions tied to Reed Enterprises' subsidiaries. Her lawyers were scrambling, citing insufficient oversight and plausible deniability. But too many records bore her name. Too many funds had moved through accounts she controlled. Her arrest made national news. As for Martin, his fall came in silence, but it was no less devastating. He had applied for dual citizenship in the EU to expand his consulting career. But the investigation exposed the falsification of his birth records. His status as Charles's son was now legally void. Without valid documentation, his application was denied. Worse still, his past employment at Reed Enterprises was under review, and major firms distanced themselves immediately. He vanished from the public eye. The confident, condescending man who had once dismissed Emma as an emotional project of an old man had become a footnote. A cautionary tale whispered in private conversations among recruiters and boardrooms. And through it all, Emma remained composed. She did not gloat. She made no media appearances beyond a single statement issued through Sunbridge. "I never wanted to destroy anyone. I only wanted the truth made visible. When justice comes, it should not come for revenge, but for restoration." Those words were printed in the Wall Street Journal, quoted on every major financial blog, and praised as an example of grace under fire. Walter, seeing the quiet dignity with which Emma carried herself, called a private board meeting at Sunbridge. In front of the leadership team, he signed the transfer of 65% of his shares to Emma. She now held voting control of the company. "You rebuilt this family's name," he told her privately. "And you did it not with anger, but with vision. Sunbridge will thrive under your care." Emma accepted the shares not with celebration, but with a silent vow to protect what she had earned the hard way. She knew better than anyone what it meant to lose everything, and what it took to build again. A week later, the media frenzy began to subside. Lawyers continued, their work statements were issued, but for Emma, the spotlight dimmed, and she was grateful. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, she took Lily's small hand and drove out of the city. They went upstate to a modest cemetery tucked between rolling fields. The weather was cool, the air still. Emma brought fresh flowers. Lily carried a drawing she had made her Emma, and a man with white hair and a kind smile. They walked slowly between the stones until they reached the grave. Emma knelt beside the headstone and laid down the bouquet. "Hi, Mom," she said softly. "I wanted you to know. We're okay. We're more than okay." She glanced down at Lily, who stood quietly, her expression unusually serious for a 6-year-old. "This is for you, Grandma," Lily whispered, setting the drawing gently beside the flowers. Emma took a deep breath. "I'm sorry it took this long to get here. I wish you had seen her. You would have loved her laugh." She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the wind carry the silence. Not grief, not anger, just peace. She thought of all the versions of herself she had once been: the broken daughter, the desperate mother, the woman hiding under a bridge with a child and a carton roof. And now she was something else entirely. Not because she'd inherited power, but because she'd reclaimed her name, her voice, her place. Walter waited by the car as they returned. He didn't speak, only nodded with quiet respect when Emma met his gaze. She had made the journey on her own terms, and she had come back not to bury the past, but to honor it. The early spring air carried the faint scent of cherry blossoms as hundreds gathered beneath the white canopy tents set up in Riverside Park. The Hudson River glistened in the afternoon sun, and banners bearing the name Lily's Bridge Foundation fluttered gently in the breeze. It was a beautiful day for a beginning, and for many a symbol of redemption. The foundation's mission was clear: to provide housing, education, and vocational training for homeless mothers and their children. Emma had poured herself into the project not just with her money, but with her memories of nights beneath bridges of hunger, muffled by bedtime stories of fear layered over hope. Lily's bridge wasn't a charity, it was a lifeline Emma wished she'd once had. The guests included community leaders, social workers, donors, and even several city officials. Emma stood near the podium in a tailored navy dress, Lily at her side in white and blue. The stage was simple, adorned with a single photo of Emma and Lily from years before, one taken just days after Walter found them. The symbolism was clear. From the streets to this moment, their journey had not been erased. It had been reclaimed. But just as Emma stepped forward to give her speech, murmurs stirred in the crowd. Someone held up a phone, then another. A reporter approached her staff with a question she hadn't expected. "Miss Reed, care to comment on your father's op-ed in the National Business Ledger this morning?" Emma's brow furrowed. She hadn't read it. Not yet. One of her assistants handed her a printed copy. She scanned it quickly. The title hit like a blow. "How I Inspired My Daughter's Mission, A Father's Role in Resilience." The byline read, "Charles Reed." The piece was polished, subtle, and insidious. Charles painted himself as a stern but loving father, claiming his silence had been a tough form of love meant to teach Emma resilience. He wrote about their reconciliation after her rise at Sunbridge and positioned himself as the unspoken force behind her strength. Emma's hands trembled slightly as she folded the page. She stepped up to the podium, her smile gone but her gaze steady. The crowd quieted immediately. She adjusted the microphone. Her voice, when it came, was cool and deliberate. "Before I speak about this foundation, I need to address something I did not expect to face again. A narrative written and published this morning under the name of someone I once called father." She held up the page, then set it aside. "I want to be clear. Lily's bridge is not a product of inspiration passed down. It is not born from legacy, nor from the wisdom of a parent. It was born under a bridge while I held my child through a storm, wondering if we would live through the night." Silence. Even the photographers froze mid-frame. "I did not build this in memory of my father. I built this in spite of him." She paused, letting the words land. Then she reached into her coat pocket and retrieved a folded, yellowing envelope. "This is the letter I sent him 7 years ago," she said, holding it up. "I was living in a shelter. My daughter had pneumonia. I had exhausted every resource, every favor, every ounce of pride. And I asked him for help, for acknowledgement, for the smallest gesture of care." She unfolded the letter. I received no reply, no call, no message, just silence. She placed the letter on the podium, then looked directly into the cameras now fixated on her. So to anyone who reads that op-ed and wonders if perhaps there was another side, there wasn't. There was only abandonment and the quiet strength that came from having no one else left to believe in but yourself. Applause did not erupt. Not at first. Instead, there was something heavier stillness. The kind of silence that follows a confession, both painful and irrefutable. But then it began. A slow, steady round of applause from the back. Then another. Until the entire gathering rose to their feet, clapping not just in support, but in recognition. Recognition of truth. By sunset, Charles's name was trending for all the wrong reasons. Multiple news outlets ran headlines countering his op-ed. Former employees began coming forward recalling his cruelty, his obsessive control, his absence from anything remotely philanthropic. A popular podcast dissected the timeline, comparing Emma's public records to his article and branding it as historical revisionism at its ugliest. Social media took no prisoners. One viral post showed the image of Emma holding up the old letter captioned, "She didn't just build a bridge, she burned the lies that tried to walk over her." Charles tried to release a follow-up statement. It was ignored. No one cared anymore. His last grip on legacy had slipped through his fingers, not with a scandal, but with a single undeniable truth. The daughter he abandoned had risen without him. Emma, standing near the river with Lily by her side, didn't smile as she watched the sunset. She didn't feel triumph. She felt closure. And sometimes that was more powerful than any revenge. A week after the truth shook the city and reputations fell like brittle glass. Walter Reed quietly disappeared from the headlines. There were no farewell interviews, no press conferences. He had done what he came back to do. He had reclaimed his legacy, set it right, and now he let it go. He left Sunbridge Holdings in the hands of his granddaughter Emma, without fanfare. Only a handwritten note tucked in her office drawer. "You didn't just survive. You rebuilt what I lost with more heart than I ever had. Sunbridge is yours now." He retreated to a small farmhouse in upstate New York, surrounded by pines and silence. No press, no security detail. Just the morning sun and an old man finally free from the noise of a world that had once tried to erase him. Meanwhile, Emma stepped fully into the life she had fought so hard to earn, not as someone's daughter or granddaughter, not even as a survivor, but as a woman who had turned broken beginnings into bridges for others. Under her leadership, Sunbridge didn't just grow, it transformed. She restructured the company's vision, pivoting toward social fintech micro-lending platforms for low-income families, digital tools to teach financial literacy to single mothers, and apps that offered budgeting resources for the homeless. But her heart, as always, belonged to the project that bore her daughter's name. The Lily's Bridge Foundation expanded rapidly. What began as a single shelter program now had hubs across the entire state, providing housing, daycare, food assistance, and employment resources to women who, like Emma, once had needed not pity, but a real path forward. They partnered with schools. They trained volunteers. They built transitional apartments next to local libraries and clinics. And through it all, Emma never missed a planning session, a visit to the field, or a bedtime story with Lily. One crisp morning, just as spring began to stretch across the skyline, Emma arrived early at her office. Her assistant placed a single envelope on her desk. It was handwritten, no return address. Inside, a simple note on plain stationery. "My name is Helen. My daughter and I lived in our car for 4 months. We were out of options until someone at the shelter told us about Lily's Bridge. Today, my daughter woke up in a warm bed. She drank milk, played with books, and asked me when she could go to school again. I just got a job interview. We have a future now because of you." Emma sat still for a long time. Her fingers traced the paper as if it were something sacred. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She simply breathed in the quiet weight of the words and let them settle. Later that afternoon, Emma picked up Lily from school and took a detour on their way home. No phones. No meetings, no speeches. They went to Riverside Park just as the sun began to dip behind the buildings. The Hudson River shimmered with the last gold light of day, calm and open like a promise waiting to be kept. Lily ran ahead, her hair catching the wind, her laughter rising above the rustling leaves. She held a kite shaped like a star drawn with markers and glitter, and the same 3 stick figures she always drew her Emma and Walter. Emma stood quietly at the edge of the river. Her eyes followed the water, the bridge, the horizon. She thought of her mother, of the girl she used to be, of cardboard roofs and unsent letters, of Charles, of silence, of storms. And then she thought of now. A soft voice pulled her back. "Mom," Lily said, pointing toward the river, "do you think the bridge can take us anywhere?" Emma smiled gently, kneeling to meet her daughter's eyes. "It already has," she said. "We just didn't know it yet." As they stood there together, Emma felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not triumph, not relief. Peace. True, quiet peace. And for the first time, she didn't carry the weight of survival. She carried the purpose of healing. Because in the end, that was the only justice worth chasing. Her thoughts formed into words she wouldn't say out loud, but that would echo through every bridge she helped build, every life she helped lift, and every night she tucked her daughter into bed under a real roof with nothing to fear. Justice is not revenge. Justice is healing. If this story moved you even half as much as it moved us, then maybe, just maybe, it's because deep down, we all understand what it means to fight for a place in this world. Emma's journey wasn't just about revenge or reclaiming a legacy. It was about breaking a cycle, about building something better from the wreckage of betrayal. about proving that dignity doesn't come from bloodlines or wealth, but from what you choose to do when no one believes in you. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told, stories of resilience, justice, and the quiet power of healing, then we invite you to subscribe to our channel. Because there are more voices like Emma's waiting to be heard. And now we ask you, have you ever had to rebuild something after being broken, whether a relationship, a career, or even just your sense of self? Tell us your story in the comments below. We read every one, because sometimes sharing your truth is the first bridge to healing.